Hey everybody, thank you for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today I want to talk about one of my favorite short pieces. It is Nathanael West's Miss Lonely Hearts. I have the New Directions paperback that includes The Day of the Locust, also a great shorter piece. He didn't produce much work in his lifetime, but Miss Lonely Hearts, above all, in my opinion, is his crowning achievement. Unfortunately, he wasn't very well known in his lifetime. This is a familiar theme with a lot of great artists, and he tragically died at the age of 36 in a car accident in Arizona with his wife. This is a Jewish writer. He was an Ashkenazi Jew. His real last name was Weinstein, but he went by West. And Miss Lonely Hearts, like a few other short pieces, this is referred to as a novel or a book. I haven't seen it referred to as a short story, but it's only 58 pages. And like just a handful of other short pieces, ever since the first time I read this, it has stayed with me. It has hovered over my mind. Some pieces I can think of are Charlotte Perkins Gilman, The Yellow Wallpaper, Virginia Woolf, A Haunted House, Nathaniel Hawthorne's Young Goodman Brown, James Joyce's Araby, and a few others. But add to that Miss Lonely Hearts. In general, the plot is about a newspaper writer, a columnist, whose real name we don't get, but he goes by Miss Lonely Hearts. This is his name in his column. And it started out as just a way for him to get a foot in the door and eventually get his own gossip column. But people actually take this joke seriously, and he begins to get flooded with letters of real suffering. And eventually he gets to the point where he realizes he's just repeating the same inane nonsense back to him. And we pick up in this story where he is finally just jaded with it. And in fact, we get a visual of that right off the bat, where he reads this awful, awful story of suffering and heartache, and just someone in a very bad way pleading with Miss Lonely Hearts to give them advice, and he just tosses it in a drawer and lights up a cigarette. But that's sort of the start of this, and it reminded me of The Moviegoer by Percy Walker. This is Walker Percy. This is a wonderful novel. But right at the beginning of it, our protagonist is looking at some pencils and keys and change, miscellaneous things that he's pulled out of his pocket and put on a dresser, and he says, "A man can look at this little pile on his bureau for 30 years and never once see it. It is as invisible as his own hand. Once I saw it, however, the search became possible." So right from the beginning, that's on page 11 of this novel, he begins what he refers to as the search. And in the same way, on page 1, he found it impossible to continue. The letters were no longer funny. And then on page 32, for the first time in his life, he is forced to examine the values by which he lives. So, like I said, it's 58 pages. It is completely shorn of any fat. This is just pure meat. It's got beautiful figurative language. Its writing aesthetic is as well crafted as the content is deep. We've got man versus nature, art versus religion, the attempt to establish a moral system without the cross of Christ. Again, this is a Jewish writer who in his life became interested in Christianity and mysticism, so in a way this is him trying to reconcile all of these religious tensions. We've got man versus nature, like I said, and man has, like he says in here, man has a tropism towards order, whereas nature has a tropism towards disorder and entropy. It's got a perfect ending that's worthy of a Chekhov short story. And there is not a sentence in here that isn't put to a functional use. There's nothing superfluous. It's nearly a perfect piece of writing. It's got, like I said, it's got Freudian imagery. I think it's the Mexican War obelisk that he's sitting across from, and suddenly it starts to lengthen and turn red, and then a few passages later he realizes that he's repressing this need for a woman. But again, this is just another way in which he's trying, through the search, as Percy calls it, he's trying to attach this emptiness to something. Another way this can be looked at is a descendant of Dostoevsky. It's about suffering, it's about morality, it's about justice, and it's about violence as a means to investigate these human urges. Of course, in both the brothers Karamazov and in Crime and Punishment, there's a violent crime at the heart of it that spawns all these musings on morality and suffering. Although the overt violence is delayed in this book, there's still the same thing, and there are violent tendencies, which I believe show just how passionate this innate longing is. We get a great image of his attempt to establish a moral system without the cross. When he is back at his home, we see this ivory Christ figure that hangs opposite the foot of the bed, and it says he had removed the figure from the cross to which it had been fastened. So in this, through this very real physical visual, we get a precursor to what it comes up later. And I didn't actually notice this the first couple of times I read it, but this time I really noticed this need to establish a morality without a religious system. However, in trying to do this, because now it's devoid of any absolutes, it's very difficult. And it says that he remained as dry and cold as a polished bone, and sat trying to discover a moral reason for not calling Mrs. Doyle. Now, this call on Miss Doyle would result in adultery. If he could only believe in Christ, then adultery would be a sin. Then everything would be simple, and the letters extremely easy to answer. So there's this very deep conflict that West keeps compounding through layers and layers. The first layer being all these letters that get written to him, and the next layers being things that are in his mind, and also things that he gets himself into in real life. You've got this character, Shrike, who loves to just jab at Miss Lonelyhearts over and over. And one of the salient things that Shrike says is, forget the crucifixion, remember the Renaissance. And this is his big thing. He wants to have Miss Lonelyhearts replace this bent towards religion with a bent towards art. And there's a Freudian impulse here where Freud found that the best sublimation for repression is through artistic creation. But then there's this other side of it that reminds me of Baudelaire in his poem Be Always Drunk, or Be Drunk. I think the original French is Écrasez-vous. But the whole point of that poem is man must be drunk on something, be it art, religion, or poetry. I think it is. That may not be quite right, but religion and poetry, or religion and art, are in there. And that's exactly what's happening between Shrike, who represents art, or the Renaissance, and Miss Lonelyhearts, who represents religion in the theocratic age. We also get an allusion to Wordsworth's poem about the world being too much with us. It's a direct allusion. It's really well done. But Shrike says, "You are fed up," speaking to Miss Lonely Hearts, "you are fed up with the city and its teeming millions, the ways and means of men, as getting and lending and spending, you lay waste your inner world. These millions are too much with you," which is interesting. So there's this subtext there where Miss Lonely Hearts has established a solipsistic world where he is the world, and the people in it are too much with him. And this comes through again when Shrike says to him, "You spiritual lovers think that you alone suffer." Miss Lonely Hearts by Nathanael West, published in 1933. I highly recommend this short piece. 58 pages, it can be read in one sitting. I guarantee, however, that it will haunt you the way that Kafka and Dostoevsky haunt us.